And Parshat Beshalach is jam-packed with so much, and it's not just all religious or biblical, it's us. A special shout out to my dear friend Dr. T, Sermon of the Century, well, at least the century of today. And I want to talk about why there is something really unusual happening this week, which you may not be familiar with, but that is the run on empty egg cartons and cottage cheese containers. If you're not familiar with that problem, it happens every year around this time. And it's due to the fact that today is Shabbat Shira, the Shabbat of song. Why? Because in the weekly portion that we read, there was the song at the sea, the song of Miriam, and in the Beth Torah today, the song of the prophetess Deborah or Devorah. So all these songs together come to make a Shabbat Shira, a Shabbat of song. If we were here in our congregation, we'd probably sing some special tunes or so on, but it's a known as Shabbat Shira, and that is directly responsible for the run on cottage cheese containers and egg cartons, and I promise I will tell you how that happens. But in terms of news, you know that we've been doing this now. It's coming up almost on 11 months, and shortly we'll be back to that date in March when it all started, which was Purim basically. And it's been a long haul. And it's true that today's news is worse relative to the ending that we all want. In other words, we see an end. We know it's coming. We know there's going to be some kind of conclusion here. We know that if you get vaccinated, it can be effective. We know that if you're vaccinated and it's effective, you yourself will not get sick. You'll have to wear a mask for a while. We'll learn all about that. And as I've always said, I'm not a doctor. I don't peddle science or pseudoscience. But what's clear is it's getting harder knowing that the ending is possible than when there's no end in sight. Now, you might argue with me, but I do believe that knowing the end is close and just out of reach is somehow pushing people to their edge more than we were all in this together. Because we're no longer all in this together. We're all in this in different and separate ways. But as long as we're alive, we should be grateful. And hopefully things do improve and we start to see the end even closer, but we encourage each other to be patient and wait for the end. And hopefully it's done in a fair and honorable manner so we can all get to the end together. But things are obviously much better than when we started, when we didn't know how this disease worked, when we didn't know whether there's any way to stop the spread. We didn't know if it would get worse. We didn't know who was affected. But we do know that the new variants are affecting younger people, and they spread rapidly, and that is not good news. But we also know that the flu season has been a bust this year. There's been almost no flu directly related to social distancing and wearing masks. So it does tell you that there's been a shift in our behavior, interactions, and in the way diseases travel. So it is possible to effectively change the way things work. We have to commit to them, and we have to be patient. And we have to be cautious, because this COVID, is slippery. And human behavior is not always predictable. But we're in it for the long haul, whatever that haul is. And Purim is coming up. I recommend, if you'd like to celebrate Purim, put on a mask and make Zoom calls to all your friends. Send them gifts of baskets. Do whatever you want, but don't get together. It's just not worth it. And also Passover. Pesach is coming. Last year we had over 15,000 views of our Seder. I'm hoping to put something together this year, the same thing. Hopefully we'll do the same partnership with YouTube, and we'll put it out there. It will be beautiful. Again, it will be lovely. It will be exactly what we need in a time of distancing. Now, last year, I know many of you were together as families. This year might actually be more difficult because your bubbles are smaller. We know new things about the elderly versus young. Kids are in school, they shouldn't be with their grandparents, and so on. We'll see where it goes. We'll see. But hopefully this year will make it just as meaningful as we did last year. And today, in this week's portion, it doesn't mention cottage cheese containers or egg cartons, but I do want to talk about what happens as you start to build a nation. The opening line of the portion is Vayihi b'shalach paro et ha'am, and it was when Pharaoh sent out the people. Moses had said, "Let my people go. Shalach et ami v'yavduni, send my people out and let them serve God." So there was this reference to the people, the But has its root in the word im, which means with or together. When you are a people, like a magnet, you're held together. But it could also be a conglomeration of individuals who don't want to be with them, but want to be with us, without the us being defined really well and clearly. And that, in fact, seems to be what it is. If we look at the Midrash acts as sort of a second look at the insight and the inside story of what happens. We find that the opening of our portion hints at a couple very important and somewhat odd statements. It was when Pharaoh sent the people, they did not go past the land of the Philistines because it was close. They could have gone the short way. But God was afraid that they'd detect war and the people couldn't handle the war, so he took them the long way. But if you look at it closely, it doesn't say he took them the long way. It says he was afraid that they would return to Egypt. In other words, they'd come against a military force, and here they are, no matter what you think of them as a people, they were just a group. They didn't necessarily have command structure. They didn't necessarily have confidence in leadership. They just knew they didn't want to be in Egypt anymore. So they gathered together without a clear objective to get out. But the moment they would see war, they would panic and they'd flee back to the only life they knew, which was Egypt. They'd say, this is not a good plan. And here in the next verse, verse 18 in chapter 13, it says, Vachamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. And it's not clear what vachamushim means. It's from the word chamesh. And it could also mean chamash, which means armed. So they were either armed or it was a fifth. It's not clear what it was, but the Midrash tells us they indeed were armed. But also only 1/5 of the Hebrews chose to leave Egypt. Let that sink in for a minute. 1/5 chose to leave. In other words, 4 out of 5 of the Hebrews decided to stay. They did not leave. And then it says, V'gam erev rav ala itam, and also a mixed multitude came out with them. In other words, there were Egyptians and other cultures mixed into their society that became part of Am Yisrael, of the people of Israel. So what happens in these early days of Exodus is not this pristine Hollywood vision of every Hebrew gets up and leaves. No. No different than the Hasidic dynasties before World War II. Many of them opted to stay in Europe. They had chances to leave, and they didn't. Not all, some, but there was this general sense, we are staying, we are committed to our country. They maybe didn't believe what was coming, it's fair enough. And no different, we don't know exactly what happened, we don't have very good records, but we have the Midrash to tell us explicitly that so many did not leave. It's quite shocking. But this sort of gives you an indication of the confusion and the challenges that belie the imagined perfection of the clear-cut, everybody leaves, the ocean splits, they go through, everything's happy and perfect. Far from it. And Moses has to deal with this mixed multitude. And these people who have made choices to leave, some who have made not, some who are on the verge of going back. And constantly throughout the life of Moses, the people are saying, we should have stayed in Egypt. What are they referring to, we should have stayed in Egypt? Well, our families were still there. Who knows? It's so hard to unpack this story. But just so you know, it is definitely not a clear-cut case of Hollywood, all the Hebrews picked up and went, and it was the mixed multitude that go with them. This sets up in what I imagine is a sort of juvenile disposition of Israelite identity. They were not a sophisticated people with a vision. They just knew they wanted out. That is why the fear of war was too much for them. Just imagine, if you look at a map, the land of the Philistines is just right around the corner from Egypt. They were literally moments away from going into the promised land. But yet they went the long way through the Red Sea and so on, and eventually they ended up in a desert. Some say it was Saudi Arabia. It's not clear where it was. 40 years they ended up in a desert when they were literally, all they had to do was agree that come hell or high water, war or peace, they are getting into that land. And what's to say they wouldn't have? They had armaments, and the answer is they weren't unified. They didn't have the leadership that could unify them immediately. It took time. It took a compression of struggle and heartache and hardship. It took 40 years to compress this disparate group, this wild-edged civilization, into something that was capable of becoming a true people. This was a very juvenile group. And you start to see that because the response to a people who know what they want is not miracles. The response to people who know what they want is a plan. But miracles are for people who don't know what they want and need to be pushed. They need to be cajoled. They need to be persuaded. And miracles, I think, are juvenile. Certainly for building a nation, miracles are a weak way to create identity. And often, if you look at the Bible, which to the Bible's credit, to the Torah's credit, it explicitly leaves in the failures. It doesn't remove the failures of miracles. It's not afraid to be realistic about its failures. And there are many miracles that were supposed to be impressive and fell flat. And think about the miracle of the manna. Here you have the miracle of manna, which in the morning they wake up and there's this white powdery substance on everything and they scrape it off and it's some kind of food substance. Nobody really knows what it is. There's some suggestions of various types of sap from plants and so on. I've never heard a really good explanation. So in fact, it might have just been a pure, straight-out miracle. It's possible. But that is, again, proof that things, just because there's miracles, that doesn't mean that they work. Because just because the Bnei Israel, the Israelites, had manna, and they could eat off of it, and it would sustain them, and the text tells us it tasted like dough fried in honey, like some kind of donut, and that you could use it for anything you wanted. And some say it was like tofu. You could make it taste like whatever. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they have this miracle with them the entire time they're in the desert. It stops when they leave the desert and go into the land of Israel. It's unclear what it is. And what do they say to God about the manna? We're sick of it. It's this revolting little bread you give us. We can't stand it. But the miracle, because the miracle wore off. Miracles wear off. People get used to miracles. It doesn't engender belief or loyalty or fealty. It doesn't. And we see this over and over, that miracles fall flat. And if you read the story of the manna, you'll also discover there was this disjointed understanding of how to create ritual. If you read the story of manna, Shabbat is created by Moses chastising them not to look for manna on Saturday. It's a day of rest. Well, it might have been better if the text would have said, and Moses went to the people and he said, when the heavens and earth were created, day 6 was the last day of work. Day 7 was a day of rest. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden sat around and enjoyed time off and family time together, and we need rest. We've worked for 400 years for Pharaoh. We need one day of rest. Sell them on the dream of rest, on the dream of family, on the dream of time. Sell them on something more than, don't you dare violate the Sabbath, because that's the day that God said, don't collect manna. And if you read the text, in fact, it sounds almost like they forgot to give the story and they just went right to the rules. And it's no surprise that the response of the people is, and the children of Israel said unto Moses and Aaron, "Oh, we wish that we would have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and we ate bread till we were full, for you have brought us into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." And they went out on Shabbat morning to collect manna in defiance of Moses, who said, don't go out on Saturday to collect it. And the people said, why not? Why not? What's Saturday so special? Because you told us to take the day off? The rationale was missing. The romance was missing. There was something extraordinary about Shabbat, but it wasn't conveyed properly. And that's what happens when leadership and the people are not united in vision. Moses knew what he wanted to accomplish, and the people were a mess, literally. So here's where we get to cottage cheese containers and egg cartons. So the story goes in the text. The people went out on the seventh day, and they didn't find any manna. And that proved that Moses was correct. And the miracle was that for 6 days there would be manna. On Friday there would be double portions of manna. Because remember, the text will tell you that if you took more than your allotted measure, let's say it was a gallon. If you took more than a gallon, by the time you got home, it had shrunk into a gallon. Didn't matter. No matter how much you collected, you only ended up with a gallon. It was a miracle. And Friday, you could collect 2 gallons, which is why we have 2 challahs on Shabbat, the double portion. There was a double portion on Friday, and there's a double portion of challah on Friday. Lechem mishnah, a double portion. But Saturday morning, if you went out, there was nothing. So, the Midrash tells us this great story. There were people who wanted to prove Moses wrong. So what they did was they saved their leftovers from Friday. They went out into the field Friday night. They spread it around Friday night all over the field. And Saturday morning they came out to collect it to prove Moses was wrong. And it was gone. Why was it gone? The birds ate it. They were going to prove Moses wrong and say, look, there it is. The birds ate it. And that is why, my friends, cottage cheese containers and egg cartons are in short supply, because if you are in any Orthodox institution or any school or even online, you probably made a bird feeder this week. And you probably hung it on your front bush of your house. You filled it up with bird seed. And you did that to thank the birds for supporting Moses and the miracle of the manna, and not letting Moses be exposed by those who would want to subvert his vision. So as a thank you to the birds on Shabbat Shirah, on a Shabbat of song, we support the bird song, and we use egg cartons or cottage cheese containers, or truthfully whatever you want, but that's what I remember from school. And I remember my mother and all her kids' crafts, and every year there was a new craft that just involved bird feeders of some sort, always made with milk containers or cartons or something. And I would imagine, maybe not this year as much, but if you drove through an Orthodox neighborhood this Shabbat, you would see weird things hanging from bushes that look very much like what I described. And that was to thank the birds for not letting Moses be betrayed. Little piece of Jewish history you might not be familiar with. But this bizarre intro to Shabbat really strikes a chord with me. It really talks about how challenging it is to get a community to understand the meaning of the traditions when you don't have good management of the community, and the community is so diversified. This does speak to why Jewish communities break themselves down into small little bits and pieces, because it's hard to give explanations that everybody can embrace and everyone can participate in. And often there are people who try to create their own unique narrative for different traditions and different values. But now we have to talk about something really important. And it's no different than the conversation we're having about pandemic, about who is it that is supporting households, who is doing the lion's share of the work, who is mostly responsible for children going to school online. Who is it? Well, studies have shown that it's still women. Studies have shown that women are bearing the responsibility for, under lockdown, for the home. And this week's portion, in my opinion, is not about egg cartons or about miracles. It is actually about something far, far deeper, and that is in praise of women. And specifically, within the middle of a book that is purely about men and their exploits and their power and their victory and God's power and God's masculine power, all that victory is set aside in this week's portion in three specific ways. The first is that when Moses finishes his song at the sea, that's the end of it. Moses and the Israelites have sung their song, but no, Vatikach Miriam, and Miriam takes. What does it mean to take? To take means to take by force or by right, but not with permission. And Miriam takes center stage, and she takes the flutes and the drums, and the women of Israel sing their own song, a rebuttal to the misogyny of the men singing the song and claiming the Exodus for themselves, when we know that it was the women who saved the Israelite babies. It was the women who gave birth and suffered all the risk. We know all the stories of the women who were heroic, who kept Jewish people alive, and yet when it came to the song at the sea, they don't appear until Miriam Vatikach. She takes it back by force. And to double down on that, the rabbis who you may think of as misogynistic, but they were far from it, there were all types, just like there are now. The rabbis insisted that today's Haftorah, Howard Weinstein read a Haftorah for 17 minutes. It's one of the longest, if not the longest, Haftorah of the year. And who is it about? Two women. About the prophetess Devorah, who was the leader of Israel at a lawless time. The one who led Israel was Devorah, a woman who was in charge for years, respected, wise, fearless, heroic, Devorah. And who helped her? Yael, whose family lived in the valley where there was the war, also put her life at risk to rid the mortal threat Sisera from this earth. Three women are brought to life as a counterpunch to the idea that the Exodus was a male phenomena. And how do we know that it was attempted to be spoken of as a male phenomena? Because when it mentions how many people go out of Egypt, what does it always say? Shesh meot elef ragli, there were 600,000 feet. That could mean 300 people, 300,000. It could mean 600,000. Levad minashim vitaf, excluding women and children. It could also sometimes say yotzei melchama, which means men of military age, 20 to 60. So they looked at their society as how strong was your male might from 20 to 60, excluding the elderly, excluding the young, and excluding the female. That is why this portion is so important. The Shabbat Shirah is not a song of birds who helped Moses in his little miracle. It's not a song of exodus, of the perfect exodus of a people romantically picking up and leaving intact and going and becoming something great elsewhere. It was discord and discontent, but still out of it all comes a refrain, which is, don't forget who got you here. It's very important to understand that somebody made a choice which Haftorah to have this week. Somebody made a choice what should stay in the text of the Torah. Somebody made a choice to tell the failures and successes, and some of it was told subversively, and some of it was told in a way that was uncommon in those days. But yet it survives, and the idea that this Haftorah and this portion has three women of authority, power, grace, dignity, strength, and self-starting heroism is too important to miss. And that is why, my friends, this is Shabbat Shirah. It's the song of those who are often unheard that we finally get to hear. Speaking of the song that we finally get to hear, I need to share with you two things. The first one is about Valentine's Day, and the second one is about Tu B'Shvat. Both come as winter is starting to lose its grip, when the dark of winter has probably set in and we've had enough. And as the days get colder, the light gets longer, it offsets it. But we're looking towards those little markers in time that tell us that it's moving on. Tu B'Shvat, Thursday, the 15th day of the month of Shvat, is the new year for trees. And I don't want to get into what it means ultimately, but it's essentially when the tithing year for trees starts. But for us in a non-agricultural society, it's a reminder that there's a wake-up coming and spring is on its way. And Valentine's Day is a day of love. And I believe I've started hearing from my daughter that we're no longer calling it Valentine's Day. It's Heart Day or Love Day or something like that, because it seems, even in general society, to be too focused on Valentine's, and more it should be about what it really is, which is love, which I kind of like. And I received an email from Sweet Peas, which is a florist in Toronto. And you know what they said? I love it. They said, we've worked so hard during pandemic, and I know that you all want to give flowers on Valentine's Day, but it's going to be too hard on us, too hard on our staff, too hard on our people. Please, we want you to know we are limiting our service for Valentine's Day because we can't handle it. It's not good for us. It's not healthy, and it's not stressful. And it's too stressful. And then they go on to say something that I believe needs saying, regardless of whether you believe in Valentine's Day or you don't. Here's what they say. Pulling back on the reins has long been overdue, both for my team and for myself. I have always felt that Valentine's did more harm than good in the floral industry. You'll see that sentiment emerging as you read comments on their post, with overwhelming support from other florists. Think about the florists. It's time to rethink what Valentine's should be, if it should be anything at all. You ready? Love doesn't know what day it is on the calendar. Valentine's is not a make or break of a relationship. Enjoy your time together. Be thankful for each other. There is no need to put so much pressure on a single day. You can go to Sweet Peas and send them a note. And I can tell you right now, they are absolutely 100% right. And they are so right, that is actually what is about to change everywhere. Everywhere it is going to change. Whether there's one day on the calendar that is most important, or it's what we do with the feelings we have. And that is why Jewish life is going to change as well. Jewish life has also been conglomerated into very tight little days. So what if Purim is celebrated over 3 days? What if instead of having Purim celebration on Friday, you have it on Saturday? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Maybe you'll be able to relax and enjoy it with family, maybe. Anyhow, lots to talk about that, but I want to end with a final thought sent to me by a dear friend about Tu B'Shvat. A little piece of poetry. Hopefully it lifts you like it did me. As we pass midwinter, skies are slowly becoming lighter, little by little, moment by moment, more and more each day. And although the land still whispers stories of rest and deep inner work held within the darker, quieter moments, there is also a new feeling being felt, one that is activated and encouraged by this slowly growing sunlight, one that tenderly and gently strokes our own inner light, our shape-shifting, growing ways, letting us ponder in the back of our minds what we want to grow into when the time is right, what form or language we will take on in the world beyond our skin and beyond our casing. Friends, when we come back, it is time to start acknowledging those who got us back. Of course, frontline workers, all the caregivers. Think of all the people who are doing so much work in mental health right now, which is such a critical thing. Think of all the mothers, the wives who have made the home possible. Think of it. We know, we understand what's really happening. We should be grateful. We can also change it. I'm no different than anyone else. I can do more. But in the interim, let us think about who we want to thank, what is most important, who we want to be, and how we want to make the spring a better, more wonderful time. On this Shabbat Shirah, Shabbat of song, in praise of those who do the most and are praised the least. Shabbat Shalom.